Hello and welcome to my second video of 100 Great Paintings from Western Art History. I hope you have seen the first video. If not, please check it out. This is the second of what will be 10 videos covering 10 paintings on my list of 100 great paintings. One of the things I would like to say about this process is how difficult it was to choose the art that I have chosen. I did not want the same old list of famous paintings. I wanted to choose paintings that were important, that were in some way excellent, demonstrated a kind of excellence, but also in a way that challenged the notions of what painting was at the time that it was made. These are paintings that challenged both how painters and how viewers saw art and saw painting. I also wanted a diversity of work. So here we see a very large Monet water lily. So I wanted to include large paintings, medium-sized paintings, small paintings. I wanted to include paintings that were political and paintings that were apolitical. I wanted to include paintings in a variety of style, from representative to abstract and everywhere in between. I wanted to choose paintings that covered the specific and important aspects of the major movements of Western art history. And there were obviously certain artists I really wanted in this list. The challenging part is how to pick the most representative painting of that artist. That was very difficult. So I put a lot of thought into it, but it's been a fun process. A difficult process, but a fun process. So I hope you enjoy this second video. We're going to look at paintings 90 through 81. And please, people, remember, if you have an interest in this work, in this art, in painting in general, please subscribe and like. It will help me out a lot. And also, please share this if you think you have other people in your life that would appreciate seeing this work and thinking about this work. So here we go, painting 90. Frida Kahlo, Las Dos Fridas, 1939, 67 by 67 inches. So I most definitely wanted to include a diversity of artists, not just art, but artists in this list. And I most definitely wanted to include women artists. Unfortunately, there were not a lot of women artists who achieved acclaim prior to the 60s and 70s. And those that did often had some association with some male artist, for better or for worse. Frida was in relationship with Diego Rivera, who was also an artist I could have included in this list, but did not. I chose Frida instead. What I want to say about Frida is that her work is tenacious. It's tenacious in the sense that it was created by a woman at a time when it was not easy to be a woman artist, or to be recognized as a woman artist. But it's also tenacious in its honesty. Her work is like, okay, here I am, this is what you get, right? It's very direct. It has kind of a naive style, and by that I mean she was not a revolutionary painter in terms of brushwork or style, but her content was revolutionary in the sense that here it is, deal with it. And so here we see these two versions of herself. And exposed, right? This kind of vulnerability of heartbreak, or whatever this sort of symbolizes. You know, I don't want to read too much into it. That's up to the viewer. But the other part of the relentlessness of her work is here you can see in this picture, she was seriously injured in I believe it was a bus crash, and damage to her spine, and then she was unable to create work in the traditional way, and so she painted actually in bed. And I think this picture is actually staged, but she actually did paint this way in bed, you know, and she had this vision and she was going to be relentless about it. And it's just a direct, what you see is what you get. Here I am, these are clouds, these are people. Here's my symbolism, a kind of personal symbolism, not a universal symbolism. It's not really surrealism. It's not Dada. It's just her work. This is my work. And she put it out there for people to deal with And there's a kind of direct authenticity and honesty about her work, which is very powerful and which I think still resonates to this day with many viewers. A kind of direct relationship to the viewer through her work. '89, Max Ernst, Europe After the Rain. So of course we need some surrealism in this list. This is my first surrealist artist. 21 by 57 inches from 1941. First of all, it's a very unique format, right? It's so long and thin. The farther a painter gets away from a traditional rectangle, the more difficult it is to create a composition that unifies that rectangle. A long, thin composition, whether it's vertical or horizontal, is very difficult to unify because it wants to, it's too wide, it wants to break up, or it's too high. How do you get that to unify from top to bottom or from left to right? So he unifies this composition through the idea of landscape and through repeated vertical columns. But look at this imagery. I mean, what the amount of crazy detail going on in these figures and that texture. And as you see, oh, that's a body, and that's a creature, and that's an animal, and that's a skeleton, and oh, that's a torso. And there are all these images hidden in that landscape. This kind of almost like trippy, otherworldly, other planet kind of landscape that is actually built out of organic forms, but yet reads as mountains and towers or totems, whatever those things are, rock formations, but they're actually all made out of a kind of organic body form. Very unique. And, what a unique vision and what a unique way to present work. '88, Hung Lu, Refugee Women and Children, from 2080 by 120 inches. So here is our second contemporary artist of this list. Hung Lu is a very productive and well-known and amazing painter, contemporary painter. You can see here that they work with a representational style, but a very expressionistic process within that representational style. And so we see gestural marks like in the clothing. We see drippy marks like in the clothing and in the space and in the bird. We see specific forms, the hands, the face, the eyes, the flower. And they're merging all of those forms together, right? They are merging all of those processes together into one image, even though there are multiple approaches to painting in that one image. And we see that there's this social commentary, but at the same time, this homage to a tradition of Asian painting. And so that bird, the stork, the pheasant or quail or whatever that is in the front, those are traditional Asian painting forms from centuries ago, but also mixed with a contemporary story. So it's a beautiful way to merge the past and the present and the tradition and the contemporary. Their style shows a beautiful merger of multiple processes of painting into one cohesive composition and image. '87, John Singer Sargent, Lady Agnew of Lochnaw, 1892, 50 inches by 40 inches, a large-scale easel painting. So John Singer Sargent is one of the most beautiful brushwork painters in history. His work looks so effortless. Oh, you just brush this way, and then you get cloth. Or you brush this way and that way and you get a pattern of upholstery. Or you brush this way and that way and you get flesh. And it's not easy. And that doesn't come cheaply. You know, there's a process where the artist might make those strokes. Well, that didn't work. Brush it out, rub it out, do it again. Well, that didn't work. Rub it out, brush it again to get that effortless illusion. And this is illusion at its highest point, right? Where you see, when you really look at the cloth, you see, oh, that's just brushwork. But when you step back from it, you see cloth, you see a gown, you see a dress, you see whatever that wrap she has around her waist. All there in terms of form and depth and mass, but it's all just brushwork. And that is the beauty of painting, that it is a lie, right? I don't mean that in a bad way. It's an illusion. It's a lie. Here are these brush strokes, but we don't read them as brush strokes. We read them as cloth. And the beauty with which he makes that lie is exceptional. Pierre Marcel Béranger, Orpheus in Hell, 1863. So this painting is an example of what was called symbolist art, and these painters were interested in creating a kind of haunting, dreamlike, visionary kind of work. There was also at the time interest throughout culture in the occult and seances. So there were many examples of this style of art. Why I chose this particular artist is, first of all, it's a beautiful vision of the story of Orpheus descending into hell. He was a musician with his lyre, which would captivate people whenever he played it. But the mix of styles here before the 20th century, where there's almost a kind of abstraction merged with very representational painting. So when you look at that instrument, I mean, it is super detailed and it's beautifully rendered, but at the same time, it's created through layering of paint, which kind of has an almost abstract quality. And if you look to the right of that, you see that rock or wall or whatever it is with that little owl hidden in there and those faces hidden in there. That is very abstract. That is dragged paint in layers, which becomes kind of an almost abstract style of painting. The same with the painting on the left, the gold area, that's dragged paint in a vertical fashion. So there's this beautiful merger, not unlike Hung Lu, of representational painting and a kind of abstract, not really, but abstract style before the 20th century, before abstract art was even a thing. So in some way, it's a little ahead of its time, and it has almost a postmodern quality of paint, even though it's very much a symbolist image from the 19th century. Albert Bierstadt, Valley of the Yosemite, 1864. Now note, this painting is only 12 inches by 20 inches. This is a sketch painting. Oftentimes landscape painters or other painters would paint a sketch painting or a series of sketch paintings in preparation for a master painting, a large-scale painting. So this is one of those sort of smaller, quicker, to see if this painting would actually work. But look at it. It's immense. Again, like George Inness, it's this very small painting that looks immense, that has a depth of, like, you could fly your plane through that space, and yet it's just flat and it's small, and it's such a great illusion. And of course, the other thing about Bierstadt is it's so romantic, right? This romantic Eden of America being discovered before it was filled with people. The sort of found land of, God's land, the land of Eden, the land of promise, the land of milk and honey. And there it is, right, in the color of honey. And I remember loving this stuff as a child and making drawings of his paintings as a little kid. And so I had to stick him in here. I don't know that he's one of the 100 greatest artists of all time, but he certainly made a lot of beautiful work in that romantic, sometimes called the Hudson River style, of that romantic, grand ethos of the undiscovered American continent. '84, Marcel Duchamp, Nude Descending a Staircase, 1912. So in some ways, here we have our first conceptual artist. This is a very famous painting that was exhibited at the Armory exhibition in 1913 in New York, which was a major exhibition of art for the first time in New York City, which included both American and European artists. And here we have Marcel Duchamp's vision or version of Cubism. Now, the interesting thing about Cubism is one of the major goals of Cubism was to break down the figure-ground relationship, and he does not do that. It is clear what is the figure moving down the staircase and what is not the figure. But at the same time, he did shatter our perception of a singular image, as we see this sort of repetitive motion of this figure moving down the staircase. And of course, he was influenced at the time by the beginnings of photography and the beginnings of video, sort of like, images, the dissection of image moving through space by photographers like Maybridge. It's interesting that the Cubists didn't really relate to this painting because they thought it was too futuristic. And the Futurists didn't really relate to the painting because they thought it was too cubistic. But again, it's Marcel Duchamp was one of those artists who really liked to play with perception and challenge the notion of what art even was or could be. And so what was really interesting to Duchamp was the idea that this painting looks like it's in motion, and yet it is not in motion. There is no motion. It is static. Again, it's that illusion of painting where, oh, look at the figure going down the staircase, but in fact, nothing is moving at all. Nothing ever has. Nothing ever will. It is in the same exact position it was in 1912 today. And so again, there's that idea of illusion through painting. Our next piece, '83, Robert Rauschenberg, Canyon, 1954. So here we have the end, sort of the end of modernism. And in some ways, Duchamp was sort of in the beginning stages of true modernism. Not the initial stages, but the beginning stages. So here we have in the 50s, the sort of death of modernism and the birth of postmodernism and a return to image. But here we have a painting that he called Assemblages, a painting that has three-dimensional imagery mixed with two-dimensional imagery. So that is actually a pillow that is hanging from the painting, and there is a stuffed condor that, is mounted onto the painting, and you can see here that it has that three-dimensionality. It also has collage, newspapers, photographs, cardboard, stenciling, printing, mixed with very expressive painting and a density of structure and a density of texture and a density of image all crumbled together, right, in this very sort of weathered and worn image, this dark weathered image, which really was this sense of Dada, the influence from Dada, of art not being precious, of art not being mythological, of art not being spiritual. It's something you make, and it can be made out of anything, mixed with the idea of a conglomeration of imagery, right? Which today, of course, people are saturated with images. You know, how many videos of art, for example, are on YouTube? So we're inundated with images. And this is kind of an artist who almost predicted that, this sense of there are so much thrown together into one thing that it doesn't actually mean anything anymore. And so he really was getting at that sense of the birth of postmodernism and the power of media and the power of image and how that would be used in culture. '82, Wayne Thiebaud, Valley Streets, 2003. So Wayne was actually also a postmodernist and was recognized in the 50s and 60s for what was called pop art. He made paintings of ice cream cones and cake and pie, and the idea of the modern culture, pop culture, fast food, the birth of all that in the 50s, right? After World War II, all of that was born. It did not exist before that. And then he graduated through his career into various other imagery, and then at some point settled on landscape. But here we can see what he does with the landscape is so interesting in how he fractures space, because there's this cubistic influence of fracturing space where some parts of the landscape and the buildings look perfectly flat and other parts of the landscape or the building seem to have 1 point perspective and depth, and other parts seem to have some kind of weird non-1 point perspective and depth, and some of them are sort of a conglomerate of all those things. And am I really looking at space? Am I looking at depth? Am I not looking at depth? Am I looking at buildings how they would actually appear or how they don't actually appear? And so it becomes this very abstracted, really cool way of presenting both architectural structure and landscape structure sort of broken down into its parts and totally playing with perception and perspective. You know, a building does not have that kind of perspective, right? That building in the front. That's a 2 point weird perspective. And the other thing about his work is the beautiful color. Like just these harmonious but also discordant color relationships put together and held together through composition. I have to mention this arrow shape, right? The road coming down, not in the center, but to the right of center, coming down to the arrow point where the two angles converge, and that arrow point holds that whole composition together, because otherwise all of those other shapes would fragment that composition without that arrow shape holding it all together. So there's that tension of the small shapes connected to that big shape. Just a beautiful aesthetic compositional element. Our last painting of this video, 81, Swoon, or Callie Curry. I'm not sure of the title. This is a 2024 wall installation, so we have our third contemporary working artist. Callie Curry's awesome. She makes these installations all over in various cities all over the country. You can see this is actually mounted on a wall. You can see these people here in front of it to give you a sense of scale. So this is street art, right, which has always been sort of a kind of territory of the male artist, the tagger, the graffiti artist. But Callie comes out and puts these beautiful beautifully rendered, complex drawings and paper cuts onto the wall, and takes them down and reassembles them and puts them up again, and they get weathered. And the work is just phenomenal. And I love this particular image where this woman is drawing the building right in front of her. So it's like, here's the creation, here's the artist creating the creation. But then it's juxtaposed with these other elements, which again is a very postmodern thing, to juxtapose various elements together into one unified whole. So we see the flat white shapes and the abstract shapes and the spiral shapes mixed with architecture with three-point perspective, mixed with a figure drawing that architecture, all mounted on a wall so people can see it. It's not about making money. It's not about preciousness. It's about a statement and trying to communicate directly to the audience, to the people. Her work is also very personal, sort of a personal kind of imagery, but universal at the same time, just dealing with the human condition and through her own experience and through the experience of others. And it's really beautiful and haunting and sensitive in that way. So that is video 2 in our series. Please remember to like and subscribe. Our next video will be 80 through 71. And thanks for checking it out. And I hope you come back. And again, bring a friend next time. Thanks for watching.